Greetings, friends! One Ingrisky here, and this is the weekly Russian-Ukraine war update for the week of November 18th through November 24th of 2024. And this week we have a lot of updates, specifically on, again, in the South Donetsk direction. This is our favorite front of this so far in this month. This is where all the action's happening, and this week is no different. And this week we're actually going to move a little bit away from Kurakhove and towards the town of Velyka Novosilka. We have not talked about this town in a big while because it's been a bit of a more quiet sector of the South Donetsk direction here. But this week, this is where a lot of the big action's happening here. And this week, we could talk about how the beginning for the Battle of Velyka Novosilka has started. The Russians have basically started moving to the west here and have broken through, so they, as we mentioned, they took Kharkovka after they moved north here. So, they were advancing to the north here and, conquering these three villages here. But after that, there's a slight pause, and then this week they bursted westwards. And so they are moving directly towards Velyka Novosilka itself and towards the village of Rozdonovka. Now let's talk about this. So basically this week we saw that the Russians have captured basically this entire area here. So you can see a huge amount of fields between Kharkovka and Rozdonovka and Velyka Novosilka have been taken. So, and what's the meaning of this? So first is the push towards Rozdonovka here. Now, a lot of sources saying the Russians have entered the western part of this town, or the eastern part of this town right here, and they are now battling for this town. Now, the main thing is that the Ukrainian defenses aren't actually in this town itself, because as you could look down, it's basically a bunch of small buildings here, maybe some farming and stuff here, but it's not really like a good place to hold your line here. Where the Ukrainians are making a big stand is this, you can actually see it on the map here, is this trench fortification here. You could see the trench fortification, here and shit. So it's on this road, and the reason for that is because the capture. What's interesting about the capture of Rozdonovka is that it would allow the Russians to cut one of the main roads supplying Velyka Novosilka. So there's 3 roads connecting Velyka Novosilka. This road, and then this road. And with the capture of Rozdonovka, this road would be cut. With the Russians advancing from Ronopol and Novodarivka, this road would be cut, and then thus the only road that will be left is this northern route, which actually could be cut very easily by continuing if the Russians keep striking the bridges, because it goes across the river here in the Molkyala River, and so if they continue striking like the pontoon bridges and such, then this road would be pretty unusable, and Velyka Novosilka will be cut off. But first they need to take out these 2 roads, and right now this northern road, or this kind of eastern route, is now going to be taken soon, and probably by the end of next week we shall see Rozdonovka fully taken. And so right now sources are saying Rozdonovka is basically in the gray zone. The Russians have entered it, and the Ukrainians don't have much troops here, but they do have troops in this this fortification, this trench stronghold here. So we shall see how the Russians clear this village and try to storm this trench fortification here. So we shall watch that happening. However, also the one thing that's interesting, I thought the Russians, would focus completely on this, because it's like, the Russians have a thing where, in my mind, right, obviously I don't have a crystal ball. Sometimes in these videos I make these predictions, but again, I don't have like a crystal ball. I don't actually know exactly like what the Russian commanders are thinking, right? But I make prediction like, hey, this is what an idea that might happen based on just my, based on like my read of the situation. And, for me, it's like, well, why attack Velyka Novosilka when you could just cut it off and force the Ukrainians to retreat? But what Russians like doing is they like attacking the flanks and squeezing them, but then they like attacking it directly as well. So, and that's what we're seeing in Velyka Novosilka, that we see that the Russians have pushed through all these fields and have reached the outskirts of Velyka Novosilka. A lot of sources are saying they have captured these farms in the very south here, and it looks like the Russians are going to start trying to enter the Velyka Novosilka itself through this highway here into this area, and then through these fields to the north here. So that is a big push, and so right now they have entered. You could say they've entered Velyka Novosilka with the capture of these farms here. But the fact they're right on the outskirts of Velyka Novosilka is a big deal. In my opinion, I'll be like, hey, why not just try to, take Rozdonovka, and then once they do that, advance towards Nova Kumar, move across here, and then, because once they reach Nova Kumar, actually, now that I'm actually going through it, they cut this last northern route. They don't even have to take out the bridges here. So yeah, then once they take Rosnovka, they can take Novokomar, and then and reach the Malayala River, right? Or something like this, capture this area, and then once they push from Novodarivka and Ronopil, push something like this, and then Velyka Novosilka will have to be given up regardless. So because all the routes into it would be cut off. So a big gain. So I don't, it's interesting that they're attacking it directly, but maybe it was just a attack of opportunity here. So yeah, Velyka Novosilka is in danger, and now I'm expecting that Velyka Novosilka might fall around the same time as Kurakhove. I thought Velyka Novosilka would be like a secondary attack after they finish up Kurakhove, but Kurakhove is still being fought over, and Velyka Novosilka is now as much in trouble as Kurakhove is. So we shall watch this in interest. Speaking of the South Donetsk direction continuously, also I just want to say there's been no changes in the Zaporozhye or Kherson regions. So yeah, it's been quiet. However, as we continue talking about the South Donetsk direction, let's talk about Kurakhove, as we mentioned before. And this is also where a lot of the big changes happen this week as well. And because every week there's always some changes in this front. So this week, I talked about how there's two pockets forming. We talked about, like 2-3 weeks ago, we talked about the big pocket trying to encircle Kurakhove, like in this. However, there is a secondary pocket trying to capture what they call the Uspenska pocket, this pocket right here. And so this week, the focus has been in cutting the small pocket. Now, the Ukrainians are trying to defend Uspenska with everything they have. If you zoom in, you see that the Ukrainians have a strong trench network in front of Uspenska right here. And you can see that they have a strong trench network behind Uspenska, this area right here. And so the Russians the Russians are on either side of Uspenska, and with the capture of Dolinovka, with the movements of the fields in front of Maskimanovka and Bogdanovka as they reach right on the outskirts of it, they could attack on two directions. However, Uspenska is pretty well fortified for being such a small village. But the thing is that everything to the south of it, they don't have as much good defenses. And so this week, you see that everything to the south of Uspenska, the Uspenska pocket, is being slowly cut into pieces. And we see this, with many of these villages here. And this week, by this weekend, the beginning of this weekend, we saw that the Russians made some sort of giant push, according to a lot of sources, that have reached the village of Romanovka right here. This is a sliver of a village. It's a very small one. If you scroll in, they've reached Romanovka. And with this, that a lot of sources are saying the Ukrainians have fully given up the village of Ilinica and this village that I can't even begin to pronounce. Tativka or something. But anyway, these two villages have been, we don't have any like flag raising or any geolocated confirmation just yet. This is mostly just map updates and war reporters on the ground. But from what we're seeing is that because the Russians are squeezing this pocket, they took more fields to the south of this. They've reached Romanovka here. And so because they are squeezing this pocket so intensely, these two villages have completely fallen. So we don't have exactly geolocated forage just yet, but I just want to say that this is what the reports are coming in, because these are fresh. This started coming out yesterday, even today. But yeah, this village has been taken, and this village has been taken. And so now what's going to probably happen is the Russians are going to be clearing out the rest of the Uspenska pocket once this thing is cleared up. And, Hanovka and Velyky Hall will also fall. The Russians will probably attack from here and take these two villages. And then Uspenska will probably be the last to fall here. And so we could probably see this happening within a week. This small Uspenska pocket is slowly collapsing, and the Russians are have captured most of Trudova. They have captured basically they are right on the outskirts of all these villages along this river, and they're now going to make they started making the dashes to collapse this pocket. And then once that happens, they'll continue moving north towards the Vochka River here. So yeah, and then what else? And then let's talk about Kurakhove. Oh yeah, and then also, in the north here, the Russians have we talked about how they completely captured the village of Dolinovka. We saw the Russians actually raise their flags here, and most sources are saying they also have cut this road here. So this road has been fully cut by the Russians as well. So that is the gains that have happened this week in the South Donetsk direction. Let's talk about Kurakhove itself, because this is where it's very interesting. Again, if I was the Russian commander, I'd been like, hey, let's just not storm Kurakhove itself. Let's just let them give it up themselves, right? Why waste the troops? But it looks like the Russians are still pushing in Kurakhove, and they are not stopping. In Kurakhove, we talked about how last week the Russians took the eastern part of Kurakhove in this area right here. This week, the Russians are continuously pushing towards these two main defenses, and it makes sense. This kind of eastern and central eastern part of Kurakhove is a bunch of low-rise residential buildings. If you scroll in, you can see it's just a bunch of like little buildings here. So it does make sense that these were captured. However, where the Ukrainians actually can make a big stand is the Kurakhove factory, this area right here, and then these high-rise buildings in the center of Kurakhove. So this is where the Ukrainians are retreating. The Ukrainians are trying to retreat like right here into this area. So half of Kurakhove is probably already gone, but Ukrainians have fallen back to more defensible positions. So maybe the Russians continue pushing and trying to break into Kurakhove itself, but we shall see. But one thing that's interesting this week is that the Russians have crossed this kind of small river here and have taken more of the residential area of Kurakhove. One of the interesting parts that is probably these farms in the south of Kurakhove have been taken as well. Have taken this area right here. So, and so the Russians are continue pushing. And one of the most interesting parts, according to some pro-Russian sources, so let me just say this is not completely confirmed just yet, is that they have captured what they call the grain elevator. This area right here. So this is like what they call the grain area, the grain elevator or something, and the Russians have captured this with a attack. So this gives them a solid position to, if they want to continue storming these high-rise buildings directly. I'm pretty certain the Ukrainians have strong positions in each of these buildings here. If I was the Russians, I'd probably stop once I reach the outskirts of these high-rise buildings and just basically force the Ukrainians to give up this entire area entirely as the Russians start cutting it off from the back here. So, but yeah, a lot of they're pushing deep into central Kurakhove. The Uspenska pocket is collapsing. The Velyka Novosilka is now becoming encircled, and yeah, lots of changes in the South Donetsk direction. Let us now talk about the Pokrovsk direction, where we also continue seeing. It's not as sexy, but it is still very interesting. Now, again, we're talking about the southern Pokrovsk direction because this is where kind of more the Selidova area, because this is where the action is happening. This week, in the northern part, the Russians have completely captured the village of Berestivsky. We talked about how last week they reached Novosilka, and this week they are slowly but surely moving across this reservoir and trying to reach the village of Stara Terny. And this week, most Russian sources are saying, and neutral sources are saying, that the Russians have completely captured this Berestivsky here. So now the Ukrainians have fallen back to Stara Terny. This is, and Stara Terny is the main goal of the Russians in this direction, because this is where the roads intersect to try to supply Kurakhove. Now, once Stara Terny falls, the only way they'll be able to supply the Ukrainians is through Andriivka and Constantinople. That's a bit further away, so it is a bit more annoying for them. But taking Stara Terny will make the logistics to the rest of Kurakhove a lot more unsafe. So the capture of Berestivsky, and I think I talked about this last week, is that the Russians have captured the southern part of Sonsovka. We actually have geolocated footage of the Russians being here. If I've not mentioned that, then yes, the village of Sonsovka has fallen, because while we don't have geolocated footage of the Russians being right on the very western part of Sonsovka, I mean, if they, we saw they have geolocated footage of them being in the center here, and we have geolocated footage of them being in the south, where they actually had to cross a river. I have no doubt that they have captured this western part of Sonsovka, and have basically captured everything to the east of this river, and have captured Sonsovka itself. So, with the capture of Sonsovka and the capture of Berestivsky, the Russians are now going to continue pressing. There's a river here. And so they're going to continue pushing to the south and continue pushing along the reservoir here and try to restore Terny. This is the main goal. And basically all the objectives and all the obstacles that were in the way of the main Russian goal of the sector, which is reaching Stara Terny, have been captured. So we shall see if the Russians continue pushing along the fields and trying to restore Terny by the end of next week. So that is what's happening in the southern part here. And where the Russians are making a lot of progress, though, is in this area where the Russians are pushing out from Selidova here. And this week we have a lot of progress here. So this week, the Russians have completely captured the village of Pushtanska here. We talked about how the Russians are trying to take these kind of Selidova suburbs here. And this week, last week we talked about how they captured, these villages, but the Russians have pushed out from here and have now captured entirely the village of Pushtanska and have reached the village of Zotova here. So this village has been captured, and they have pushed the Ukrainians fully away from Selidova. They're also pushing a little bit to the north here. They have captured these fields here. And, so they are now pushing probably along this highway towards the village of Dasanivsky here. So yeah, a lot of progress there. The Russians are also pushing to the westwards across the fields here. The Russians are trying to reach the other village of Pustinsky, this village right here, and they have captured these fields here. And then these fields here as well. So a lot of sources are saying the Russians are trying to reach this village and are mostly trying to reach this highway. This is the main goal of pushing westwards here. The reason for this is because this is a highway that connects Pokrovsk to Kurakhove. They call this Pokrovsk-Kurakhove highway. And if they could capture this highway, then all the that's another severance of supply to Kurakhove. So, and because of this, the village of Zorya has mostly fallen as well. It was kind of surprising how long the Ukrainians were able to hold on to Zorya, but now we are seeing that the village has been taken, and basically now they're making a solid line here, and they're just going to continue pushing, to the south here towards Andriivka, and then towards the west towards, these villages along this road here. And then once they reach this highway, there's very little, we can see that they're right on the, right close to the Dnieper Oblast here. So they're getting closer and closer towards taking the entire South Donetsk direction. The main goal here is it's twofold here. There's obviously the main goal of this southern direction, which is where the Russians are mostly focusing on, and in closing the northern pocket of the Kurakhove, reaching Andriivka and such like that. The other main goal is to try to reach the southern part of Pokrovsk, or to try to build upon the success so that they could encircle Pokrovsk. So, when they reached Novosilka, like 2 months ago and such, they reached Minigrad, but, it's very, in order to capture these two big cities here, the Russians, can't just attack them directly. They have to try to attack them from the north and, and then also from the south here and from the west. And so right now they're trying to develop their positions to be able to start encircling Pokrovsk and Minigrad. And this is where the northern push makes sense. So, let's say the Russian Republic takes Zotova, and this is a small river here. So, the Russians might take Zotovka, then Nova Pushna, and then try to battle for Novotoretska here. And as they push this way, right? So let's say the Russians, capture these three villages, and then also capture all these villages along the highway, as I said, as they move westwards. So this entire area will be taken, and then the Russians will be pushing northwards, and then also east, and try to take these villages that are along here: Sushka Yar, Listovka, Dasanevsky, and then right here. And then once this happens, you can see that the Russians are now right in the southern part of Pokrovsk, and then they could start. And then one of the main battles for this area, which I think will take a very long while, is the town of Shendatenko here, this village right here, this town. It's a bit bigger, has some high-rise buildings right here in the north, and it is a strong. In the south they have a river here. There's a rail line that helps defend it from the east, and so this is going to be a very because if this village falls, then the Russians could then break through and try to cut off one of the main highways in the west of Pokrovsk here, in this highway. So, but yeah, this is where the Russians are going to try to continue their offensive. They're building the prerequisites to start storming Pokrovsk and Minigrad sometime next year. So that is the goal. The goal is to encircle Kurakhove and then build upon the progress to encircle Pokrovsk. So that is the main goal in this direction. Now we're going to talk about the Tourette's direction. some small gains this week, this area, and one of the biggest surprises is that we saw that the Russians were in this northern residential area being shelled here. So this means that the Russians have basically are, one of the main battles are going on are in this these high-rise buildings right here, and the mine next to it. So this is where the main battles are being taken place here. And so the Russians were like, hey, instead of battling directly, let's try to encircle it from the side here. And so it looks like the Russians are building upon their success here and have broken through and are trying to clear up these residential areas here. The main defenses for the Ukrainians here is this mine right here in this terracon. So the Ukrainians are held up in this terracon and mine right here. And so the main thing of the Russian, so if the Russians want to be able to secure their positions in this northern residential area, they'll have to battle for this mine, just as if they want to take the, the southern part of and the central part of Taurus, they have to take this main mine shaft right here. So, but one of the biggest goals that the Russians could exploit here by taking these residential areas here is that they could start trying to encircle the Ukrainian, attack them from a different angle in this kind of, and try to fully secure their positions in these high-rise buildings areas right here. So, and then once they do that, they can then start encircling the mine from the east here. So, and then another big thing for Toretsk is this kind of southern residential area. They call it something, but I forgot what it's called. But basically, someone made a very good point that this is what I call a fluid district. This is not, you might see this is where, like, this is contested and shit, but this entire area, this southern residential area, is in a fluid zone, meaning that, people move in here, but then they don't, like, hold on to it. They kind of, people move back and forth here, and it's, like, very, very fluid. So it's hard to exactly make a complete picture of who controls what in this area. So yeah, that's the Toretsk direction. The reason why Toretsk is taken so long is because one of the strongest Ukrainian brigades, the Azov Brigade, is fighting here. They're very good fighters, so that is why it's taking very, very long in Toretsk. In the Chasiv Yar direction, we also have gains, but smaller than what we've been discussing before. The main thing, we talked about how the Russians broke into the center of Chasiv Yar last week, and now the main battles are going on for what they call the refractory plant. The refractory plant, whatever, but this factory right here. And it seems like the Russians and Ukrainians are battling for this plant very fiercely. It's going on back and forth, and it's very, very tough. So we shall see if the Russians could take it. We shall see if the Ukrainians hold on to it. But so far, a lot of sources are saying the battles are going on for this refractory plant after the Russians broke into the center part of Chasiv Yar. And then also in the southern part, the battles are going on for these. Some sources are saying these mines are still under Ukrainian control, but a lot of pro-Russian sources are saying these kind of mines were taken by the Russians, and now the battles are going on for Stupichki right here. So we need more geolocated confirmation to see if that is true. So, but yeah, just something to keep in mind. One thing to also keep that is that the battles for Klishevka and Andriivka have finally ended. I mean, they ended like a while ago, but we now have complete geolocated confirmation that everything to the east of the Sovietsky Donetsk Donbass Canal, this canal right here, has been taken by the Russians. There was like this hole like right here where the Ukrainians are still holding on, but we have geolocated footage of the Russians being on the canal itself, so that means that this area has been captured by the Russians, and now the threat to Klishevka and Andriivka has been ended. So finally, the Russians have secure positions here to continue pushing in the southern part of Chasiv Yar here. So yeah, this kind of area right here has been taken. Or where was it? I forgot where it was. I think it was like right here actually. I believe like near Andriivka. So yeah, this entire area has been captured by the Russians, and now the Russians have fully secured Bakhmut and are now taking Chasiv Yar. A little bit here in the northern area here as well. Some sources are saying the Russians have captured a little bit more of Velyka, have captured this area right here. And I wouldn't be surprised if the Russians storm Grigorivka just to secure their northern positions here a bit better. Just try to take this area right here. So we shall see. Alrighty. There's been no changes in the Severus direction. We talked about the mix of the change up in command here after the complete failures that this command has had in the Severus direction. So there's been no changes after the command has been sacked. So we shall see for this week at least. In the Kupiansk-Liman direction, we're going to kind of combine these two fronts this week. We saw that so far in the Liman direction, the battles are going on for the center of tyranny. This battle is very ferocious and fierce. The Russians are, so the battle, it's right now, battles are going on for the center of tyranny, but so far very little progress. It's just, the battles are going on for that little village. And in the Kupiansk direction, this is where more of the fun is happening, is the Russians have completely captured the village of Kopany here. Now, this neutral map only goes by geolocated confirmation, so we have geolocated confirmation of the Russians being here, but obviously, the Russians are here, then they've taken this small little village. It's like there's one more road here. Obviously, they took the rest of it, but so this Kopany has been taken. This is developing on the success that the Russians are having in the Borova area, trying to start, just improve their positions here. So Kopany has fallen. The Russians are also have continued push towards Lazova and have captured more of these fields around Lazova, and I have no doubts that the Russians will probably try to storm Lazova in the coming week or two and try to take this little village here to continue pushing their positions farther and farther away towards the Oska River. But, so battles are going for Lazova, which will probably fall soon. Battles for Kopany, which has fallen. And then let's talk about Kupiansk itself. So first of all, in the southern part here, the Russians have talked about how they cleared this forest completely, and we have geolocated footage of the Russians being here. So the Russians have basically completely controlled this area, and now the Russians are going to probably start trying to storm the village of Gluzhovska, this village right here, and continue pushing towards Kupiansk from the south here. And so, yeah, so the Russians are improving their position near close to Nivka here. And then when we talk about Kupiansk itself, the battles for the northern part of Kupiansk are still ongoing. We talked about how the Russians are in the grain elevator, which I believe is this area right here, and in this area right here, but some sources are saying the Russians are also, have captured this area and have cut this Kupiansk-Swatovo highway, which completely threatens the logistics of the Ukrainians that are in this direction. But this week we actually don't really have more. We talked about this last week, but we don't. But so this week we actually don't really have more changes on the map here. So we don't really know if there's been any changes in this area. So we need to wait more to get a better picture of what's going on in northern Kupiansk. But so far as we know this week, the battles for this area are still ongoing. There's been no changes in the Kharkov direction. There's been no changes in the Kharkov direction. However, in the Kursk direction, there's actually been a lot of changes. And one of the main things is that the battle for Darino and Nikolaevka Darino has been ended. Now, the thing about these two villages is that they are separated by this kind of river right here. And so capturing these two villages were very hard because they had to cross the river. But this week, we saw the Russians raising their flags in the agricultural buildings here in Darino. So these two villages have been taken by the Russians, which gives them a solid position to continue pushing. And then what else in the Kursk direction? The Russians have basically the third Russian Kursk counteroffensive has ended. They have paused in this area. They took Potokivki here, these kind of villages, but they have stopped pushing towards Malaklovka. And yeah, the southern, right now, I think we talked about this last week, but this neutral mapper does not have it, but the village of Pledonovka has been taken by the Russians, so this village has been taken already. But besides that, there's been no other big changes in Kursk. I think the only thing we saw is some geolocated confirmation of the Ukrainians being a bit more further north in Martinovka here, so they have a bit more better positions near Kurakhove here. But besides that, that was some geolocated confirmation to clear up the map. Alrighty, so that's the end of this video. Hope you guys enjoyed this weekly Russian-Ukraine War update. Be sure to subscribe to my channel to continue receiving these weekly Russian-Ukraine War updates. Give this video a thumbs up if you liked it. Comment your thoughts, and I hope you have a wonderful. And be sure to share this video around. And I hope you have a wonderful day. So aim high and wander on.